Hey everyone, welcome back to the Cohesion Podcast. My name is Miriam Connaughton and I am the Chief People Officer at Simpler. And I'm delighted to be joined on this edition of Cohesion with Keri-Lynn Pajer. Welcome, Keri. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Miriam. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. And you've got one of the most interesting titles that I think I've heard, and we'll come on to that in a moment. So you're VP of Business Partnerships and Change Initiatives.
Yes.
But first of all, Agero, I think it's a company that if you own a car in North America, you might have used your services, but you might not know about it. So tell us a little bit, first of all, about the company.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we are a white label driver assistance company. If you think roadside, think accident management, consumer affairs, etc. The best way to think about it is if something happens to you on the side of the road, we're there to help. Our digital dispatch platform really is what connects everyone together. So it connects the driver, it connects, your insurance agent and the service provider, the tow truck, on the side of the road through a platform in real time.
Very cool. As a car family and car owner, I suspect somewhere along the way we have used your services and I just didn't realize it.
Yes, most likely.
Most likely. Thank you for joining us. So, before we get into your role a little bit, we like our listeners just to get to know our guests on Cohesion. So, I'm going to start off with a few little icebreaker questions. One of them was going to be, are you a cat or a dog person? And I see your lovely dog in the background. So, that's absolutely delightful. Answered already. But
Okay.
let's kind of start with, so when you're working, are you like, if you're not on a call, do you like music while you work or do you like just the quiet and calm and the thinking time?
Oh, I'm definitely a music person. Those that know me know that I operate best in chaos.
Wow. Okay. So what kind of music do you like? Is it like upbeat dance music or what do you go for?
So I am a bit of a country fan. So it's
Hmm.
usually some soft country in the background, or I do love a good Matchbox 20. So it depends on my mood that day.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm with you. I occasionally have the music going on in the background too. And so another either or for you. I mean, are you one of these people who are bouncy very early in the morning? You're a morning person, or are you a bit more of a night owl?
I am definitely more a morning person than a night
Hmm.
person.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Although some days I'm sure it feels like we're both, doesn't it? But we have to be both.
Well, yes, and the going dark at 4 o'clock is not helpful in that case. But yeah, I would much rather get up in the morning and start the day and then wind down with a good book at night.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you there. So let's unpack your really interesting role. It's a title that I've not seen that often in that combination. So unpack it for us and explain for our listeners kind of what it all encompasses.
Of course, yeah, it is a bit unique. So my responsibility at Agero is sort of a little bit of like the employee life cycle. So if you think about it from that perspective, I am responsible for talent acquisition. I then am responsible for internal communications and engagement and culture, and then HR business partnerships. So then the exit of the employee as well. And so I have a really interesting purview into the employee experience at Agero.
Most definitely. And it's so literally from bringing employees in, bringing talent in, as you said, all the way through offboarding. How do you think about that? Do you talk employee journeys or life cycles? We all have different ways of think about it. What's your approach to that?
Yeah. So I think all of that, definitely works. I think the way that I like to explain it is, your time at an organization, so specifically Agero, is a chapter in a book. And so you turn the page and you enter in, and that chapter might be really good. It might be really not good. Hopefully, it's good. But it's really all about recruiting, experiencing, developing, and then exiting. And we just hope that in that chapter of life of your career that it's one of the best ones that you have. And so in each area or each space of your journey, your life cycle at an organization, you need something differently. And so being able to pay attention to that and lean into that is really where the passion for us is.
Mm. I like the way of thinking about it as chapters because the reality is that there are fewer and fewer examples out there where we're going to get great talent in and they're going to see their whole careers out.
Right.
Those organizations still do exist out there, but they're getting fewer and fewer. So thinking about that chapter career experience while you're with us, I think is a great way of looking at it.
Yeah, and I think it also sort of focuses you as an organization to really understand and lean into what's important. So if you're very open about the fact that this is a chapter in somebody's career, and it could be a really long chapter, or it could be a short chapter, either one, by recognizing it in that way, it really allows you to connect with the employee a little bit differently and more intentional.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's a good. So, I always learn things from this. I'm going to file that away. I like thinking about things in that way. That's helpful. So let's kind of dive in to a few areas. There's so many interesting things that I want to cover with you. But you touched on kind of connecting with employees there, and let's kind of start with that big topic of employee engagement. It's just
Mm.
so important, as we know as practitioners, to the employee experience. Just start off first of all. There's no textbook definition of engagement, although there probably is, but we all have our own working definitions. What's your working definition
Yeah.
at Agero of how you define and think about employee engagement?
It's funny that you say it that way, because honestly, everyone has a little bit of a different concept of engagement. And I always find it interesting when, you sometimes talk about engagement and people are like, "Oh, it's all the fun stuff. It's the events. It's, we want to be fun at work." And it's so much more than that. And
Mm,
so the way that I like to describe it, it's a feeling. It's a feeling that you get. And that feeling both comes from like the emotional side, but also the mental side. And
mm,
so it's really about this connection, me as an employee, that I mentally am connected to the work that I do, but then I also feel connected to the work that I do and the people that I work with. So for me, it's very much a mental and emotional connection. But it's very personal. And so it's not all about having fun at work. And I think that's
mm,
also what makes it so interesting and like this really gnarly concept to sort of solve for, because it's different for everyone. And so there's no
mhm.
one answer. And you can take that as a little bit of a scary opportunity, or just one that's really exciting to sort of dig your hands into.
Yeah. No, I like how you described it. There's definitely that thinking bit, that kind of, the cognitive piece, as well as the feeling bit, the emotional piece.
Mm.
And I also think about it in that way. And also it's the acting piece, it's the behavioral piece,
Yes.
because that's, if you like, the manifestation of either good high engagement or disengagement. So it's that thinking, that feeling, but also the acting piece. And, as you mentioned, it's also intrinsic and extrinsic. So it's hard to manage, but I know from chatting with you before, I mean, you have pretty high engagement levels. So
Mm.
it's a tough thing to manage, we know, and to sustain at high levels. So what do you think are some of the kind of secret sauce that you've developed that have helped you get to that place?
Oof. Um, I would honestly say that there's two things that has brought us to this success. One is ensuring that what I believe is not the case. So it's this concept of we don't actually know, and being okay with that. That's a very humbling statement when you're in a position to try to drive something in an organization. I think when it comes to engagement, not knowing is actually a really good thing if you could take it to the second piece. And the second piece is your employees will tell you, all you have to do is
Mm,
listen. And that sounds pretty simple. However, listening, but then actually transferring that into an action to really drive positive change is really important. Um, I would say that, we haven't figured it out because it is a gnarly problem that continues to evolve. And not a problem as a negative, but one that we just have to keep focused on because it
mm,
continues to evolve. So for us, I would say, as you called it, the secret sauce. I think the secret sauce is the employee. And it's ensuring that you have a really structured, intentional employee listening program. And what we like to say here is that we don't ever ask a question that we don't plan on or don't have the ability to make changes to.
mhm,
And it's this one small act of change. And so understanding what the employee needs and wants, and really, taking that information and trying to, take one small step forward every time you hear something. And communication is a huge part of that.
mm,
I think we talk a lot about transparency, and it becomes a buzzword. But really, what transparency is being comfortable and humble and saying what you know, when you know, and how you know it. And quite honestly, what you don't know. And so we're very open at Agero about that. And it was uncomfortable at first, and it still can be
I imagine,
uncomfortable.
for
Yeah,
sure. Yeah. And it builds trust, doesn't it? I mean,
it does.
we all know that. We know that in our personal lives as well, but it's a hard step sometimes to make, and understand kind of, the responsibilities that come with transparency as well for everybody within the organization, especially when you're sharing, maybe sensitive or difficult information or whatever that is. Yeah.
Sorry.
Don't worry about it. Um, One of the things I was looking at, I mean, envious of organizations that can sustain that high engagement. It's a difficult thing to do. We all know that as practitioners. We work on it hard here as well. It's simpler. Um, and generally, engagement's going down, as we know when we read kind of the Gallup research on that, and so forth. So to have that kind of high engagement, communication's part of it. What are the other things that you feel in your environment are important to maintaining that high engagement?
Yeah. So I love this question because there's so many ways that you can go after it. I think my unique position lends a really my perspective, cool way of doing this. And so I sort of have this trifecta approach. So as I told you, I oversee internal communications, but I also oversee engagement, employee listening, and then we have what I like to call the, sort of the secret sauce here as well, which is the people business partner. So when you think about all those connection points within an organization, normally, a lot of these areas are, we develop programs and then we roll them out to the organization. And in my experience, when you roll them out to the organization, you're sort of crossing your fingers that they're going to get, sort of connected
Mm,
to and implemented. Um, the way that I sort of operate and Agero operates is our people business partners are our activators. And so if you think about it, we've got an employee listening crew who really understands and drives engagement, listens to what's going on in the organization. And then through the surveys, et cetera. But then also we've got people business partners who aren't just talking to the employees and the managers about employee relations, but they're also activating the programs that we have. And so it's less about a rollout and more about really sort of bringing it into the common thread of their day to day. And so engagement stays high because one, we're listening to the employees, two, we're very intentional about communicating what the mission is, what the strategy is, but also their specific role within it. And then we have boots on the ground who are really out there in the organization, helping to really answer the questions, stay connected, and activating a lot of what we're sort of trying to work through from an engagement perspective.
yeah. Yeah, that word activation is so important, isn't it? That's where the rubber hits the road. It's
It
where it
is.
actually comes to life. And I imagine those activators, as you call them, which I think is a great name for it. They're also, I imagine, a big part of your manager enablement, because we know how important that role of the people manager is in engagement. So th- share a little bit of
Yeah.
what are some of the things that you do to really kind of forge that partnership and really support managers effectively.
Yeah. Well, again, managers are really the key in when it comes to this. And I think the first and foremost important piece is ensuring that managers know that engagement is a shared responsibility. It isn't something that we roll out and we put a survey out once or twice a year and that just is your score. It is an ongoing, everyday, really targeted approach and really understanding your team. And if you can get your managers behind that and empowered to do it and recognizing the role that they play in the day to day of the engagement of the employee, I think that you can unlock something pretty special there. In saying that, though, what's really interesting is that not only is so one of the things that we do and we're very intentional about as well is that the manager is an employee themselves. So they're not just a manager. They yes, they have a team that they need to manage and they need to enable that team and they need to enable the organization. but they also are an employee. And so they need to understand that, like, when they sit back and they have a feeling about something, or they are not, motivated or connected to the strategy, that of course, if they're not, their team might not be. And so recognizing that they're an employee first and having a conversation with them as an Agero employee first. And then how do you, transform that into how you're a manager and what that means for you and your team. I think that's where we really focus the most.
I think that's a really kind of helpful perspective to look at it, a reminder, because like you just described, you need to ask those managers, how are you feeling about this?
Mm.
What do you think? Because until I help you maybe get aligned or understand our mission better or whatever it is, it's hard to fake that. And if you do fake it, employees are good at sniffing that out. You've got to
Yeah.
manage your own engagement as a leader. And it's an interesting, perspective that to be reminded of, because we often just say, come on, people managers, do your thing. Well, first, let me help you react as an individual. Yeah.
Right. Right. And,
That's a really helpful
Miriam,
way of
it's
looking at it.
yeah. And think about yourself, even, in the role that you have and how you sort of manage your day to day. You're trying to focus, yourself as an employee first, and then you go and lead a team and lead the organization. And if you can connect with the people in that space first, I think that's where a lot of the power starts.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a good reminder that. And you mentioned a little while ago there connectivity. Connectivity is so important to
Mm,
engagement and lots of other goodness that comes from it. You know, I love the fact that you've got this life cycle under your purview, and
mm.
communications is such an important part of that. Talk to me a little bit about how you approach building that connectivity, starting with the highest order from purpose all the way through.
Yeah. So I will say that I start off at myself, and
Mm,
I really think through what keeps me connected and what motivates me in that space. And I recognize who I am as an individual and who I am as an employee. And then try to leverage that in spaces where, we have the outreach, we have the ability to control, for lack of a better way of saying it. And so I really think about it in three ways. One is the, the reason people come to organizations and stay at organizations is really, and I'll speak to myself, the reason I do as a person is I really value the organization, what they do and why they do it. I believe in that mission and purpose. I like the job that I have. I like the work that I do. I genuinely get up in the morning and I want to do it. And I also feel valued and recognized for the work that I'm doing. And I think the third thing, honestly, is I like the people I work with. Not because,
mm,
I can go out and have, a drink with them at the end of the day, but more like they push me to think differently. They challenge me, and they're fun to work with. And so if I think about that as myself, that's what I want to be able to connect an employee to. And so, again, from an internal comms perspective, we very much work a lot around, connecting people to the purpose, making sure they understand the vision and the mission and why we do what we do. And so it's really bringing in that customer voice. A lot. We do a lot of work there. And as we talked about in the beginning, the work that we do is on the side of the road. Sometimes it's in,
mm.
a person's worst moment of their day, and just trying to keep that in the front of why we do what we do. And then, so in the comm space, it's very much about ensuring that we've got that. We have areas and ways for people to stay connected to that. In the engagement space, it's a lot around ensuring that they have a voice, and not just that they have a voice, but that we're showing them that we're listening to their voice. And I think one of the misconceptions, Miriam, is that just because I said something doesn't mean I expect you to do it. It
Mhm.
is, I said it, this is my feeling. Just tell me that you were heard. And if you can't meet that need, explain why. And I think that explain why is really key. Um, and so we spend a lot of time there, and it's about being inclusive to what people really want. And not everybody needs to participate in everything. And so we have an optionality about that part of the
Hmm.
culture. And then when it steps down, and when like we're not sure, and communication or any of that breaks down, your business partner gets involved and really helps to kind of bridge those gaps. And so we use a lot of these levers to sort of work within the organization and really ensure that everyone feels empowered to 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 make Agero what it needs to be and what we want it to be.
Yeah. I so much goodness there to unpack. I mean, going back to the stories that you said are so important as part of purpose, that really resonated with me because we can sometimes superficially think, well, it's hard because we're not literally curing cancer here, or it seems very
Mm.
obvious in certain sectors, doesn't it? I think, oh, that's clear to see that your mission is very purposeful and people are connected. But there's a human aspect to a lot of what you do. Like you said, you're
Mhm.
meeting people often at the side of a freeway in the worst experience of their day or their week, and how do you bring that storytelling to the rest of the organization? How do you curate it and get it out there?
Yeah. I think it's evolved over the years. It's and it continues to. Some is simple in the way of uh, storytelling, videos, that aspect of it. But I think one of the things that was really life, or not life changing, but sort of it changed the game for us internally, was being able. We have a concept called the unsung hero,
Mm,
and what this is recognizing, people within the organization that you wouldn't normally see as our front line, but ultimately they are the people that are really pulling things together. And so, for example, it's, the last one we did is we had a unfortunate customer who was stuck on top of their car, and this agent went above and beyond and stayed, wasn't even part of their job, but stayed on the call to make sure to keep her calm
mm,
and make sure that the emergency services got to her, and that the service provider was able to get to her, et cetera, but kept her calm and talked her through it. And that's just an example, but um, the when we talk about pride in your work and wanting to go, wanting to do your job, technically speaking, the job is to, dispatch a service provider and hang up and then check in if the service provider hasn't. This person wanted to stay with her because it's the human element.
mm,
And by sharing that broadly as an organization and recognizing, and here comes that recognition piece too, right? Which is recognizing the value that that person had, not only on Agero and our business, but that person as well in
mm.
her life, really helps to connect the dots. So I think it's about bringing the real out, and not just talking about the numbers and the strategy, but really the human aspect of what we do, because that's what keeps people where they are, is
Yeah.
the human aspect.
Yeah, no, well said. I mean, you said yourself, part of your own motivation is feeling valued. It is just an innate human trait, isn't it? And it is about
Mm.
that when you appreciate someone, you are inherently appreciating something about them.
Mhm.
Might be something you've also seen them do, but you're talking about, like your example of the agent is doing, that was kindness, that
Yeah.
was empathy,
Yeah.
and it was that willingness also to go above and beyond, which is the very definition of high engagement. Is I'm willing to go above and beyond, you know, the core requirements of my job. It's because I'm highly engaged, but I'm also very connected to that human element of what we do. I think that's a fabulous example.
Yeah. And to connect it back, the reason why that came about is exactly what I was saying earlier. It is the employee listening aspect. It is
Mm,
when we found, and we'll break it down to a little data here. We went on an engagement survey. Do you know the strategy and are you motivated by the strategy, came back as a little bit low results. And then when we dug in a little bit more, it was because, yeah, it looks good on paper, right? On
mm,
a Zoom call, but what does it really mean? And so we had to connect the dots there for people. And once we did that, that's where people were, our employees started to recognize, like, oh, no, we really are making a difference here. And here's my role within it. So then you take a step forward and you say, okay, so person in finance, what does this mean for you?
Mm,
And being able to track that back and be very intentional in doing that has a lot of value.
yeah, for sure. And through your storytelling example as well, I mean, part of that is, you're recognizing people publicly, because in that example, you're sharing it as part of your stories through all the different channels that you have. And so that's part of the recognition culture building as well, isn't it? That,
Yeah.
a lot about culture for me is it's the stories you tell is
Yeah.
what kind of creates and informs your culture. It's not the only thing, but it's a big thing. People, when you say, tell me about your culture, they'll tell stories like the example you just gave. You mentioned something earlier when you were talking about, connectivity and, feeling valued, and part of that connectivity is that connectivity has to come through transparency.
Yeah.
And, part of that is trust building as well, as we've already touched on. So when you think about the role of transparency in engagement and in trust building, you know, sharing news and information is part of that. But, how else do you see transparency being kind of part of building high engagement and great culture?
I think it's sort of the key to it that most people have the hardest time with doing.
Mm,
Because transparency, true transparency, requires vulnerability. And that's sort of a icky word for some people, right?
mm,
Vulnerability, being able to say, I don't know, or, working with somebody to build that trust. Um, that's where you have to get involved, and you have to really, sit side by side and have a real conversation. And
mm,
um and again, going back to engagement, in order for people to want to be where they are and stay motivated, they need to feel connected to the people they work with, the role they do, and the organization they have. If they can't trust that those things and what they see and what they're doing is true, then they're not going to engage in it. And honestly, if you don't know that somebody is giving you the information and telling you the truth, and being open about the work that you're doing at the base level, all the way up to the organization leadership level of what we're trying to accomplish at an organization, um, it actually is a breeding ground for something much worse.
mm,
And so vulnerability is key to transparency, but most importantly, it's the aspect of knowing when and where you've got to lean in on that. Um,
mm,
I think that was probably one of the hardest things that we had to do in our organization early on, is be okay sharing information. And again, the fear of sharing really comes from a lack of trust. And so being able to give people a little bit and try it out, and then give it a little bit
mm.
more and then try it out. It's baby steps, but
Yeah.
you can't have it without it.
Yeah, no, 100%. We've all had to redefine and reimagine what connectivity is. And I think be reminded that kind of we maybe, if we're honest, we're always underserving those people who were out there in the field. Often they were
Yeah.
underserved and undermet
Yeah.
in terms of communication and engagement. So just interested how, since that, key event in world history, how have you redefined what connectivity is for you, and how have you gone about kind of reestablishing, just the ways and means of building that connectivity?
I think fast forward a few years to where we are now, the world has changed. We I don't know that we know the answer around, hybrid, remote, and what that means. You see a lot of organizations who are, forcing people back into the office more full time. You see other organizations saying we're going to be completely remote. Agero is a flexible work model, which means we do have a place for you to go into the office if you're in that area, but you're more than welcome to work remote. And so we're still trying to figure that out. I think the piece that I do know is it will ever evolve. And honestly, I'm trying not to focus on the way connectivity was before, because that no longer exists.
Mm.
And so I'm not gauging the organization or the employees or what we do on the, the previous way, but instead trying to recreate what connectivity looks like for
Mm.
us at Agero. And, you know, I don't know that we have the answer just yet. But where I am really bullish on is that we do have a employee group that is very vocal, and we
Mm-hmm.
have built that trust and that
Yeah.
transparency. And so because we have done that, we have learned that some people like to work completely remote and they don't want to join certain events that are, whether it is virtual or not, and that's okay. We meet them where they are. And then there are other people that really value that in-person culture, and so we create a space for that as well. And so um, I think it's about putting away um, the what we used to do, and
Mm-hmm.
and gauging and scoring myself across that, and instead trying to be really creative about what should it be, and
Yeah.
knowing that it's going to change.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's a healthy way of looking at it. And I think you touched on this earlier. Connectivity is a very emotional human thing.
Mm.
It's not defined by being in the same physical space, i.e., office or wherever, because you can be in the office 5 days a week and feel quite disconnected,
Yes. Yes.
versus be working from home or out there in the field 5 days a week and feel super connected. We see that in
Hmm.
our data, don't we, when we do our engagement analysis and so forth. You can see those kind of different segments coming through. So it is more about working at it at that human level, as you said earlier.
Yeah. And I think, so I'm an ambivert at heart. It's who I am. And in the role that I have, it's very interesting because um, most would take me as an extrovert,
Mm.
which, yes, I can play in that space, but it is draining for me to do that. So if you think about the role that I have and me being in an office 5 days a week, it's exhausting. I
Mm.
love my job, but it's exhausting. Sort of, I enjoy, and this is a better fit for me, and it actually does keep me connected to the organization and to what I do, by being able to go in once a week or twice a week, and then having my own like space at home.
Mm.
And so I think that's sort of this concept of, we have a lot of people that just prefer to work behind a screen, and now it's okay to say that that's okay.
Mhm.
Instead of forcing people a little bit outside of their comfort zone where you don't get their true authentic self. But I think it's ever evolving, quite honestly, and it's
For
a
sure.
gnarly situation to work through.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I think we're in a really great age to sort of figure this stuff out.
Hmm.
But yeah, I don't
No,
know.
I agree. It's like flexibility. I think you can't roll it back. And I think nor should we, nor do we want to, really. It is
Right.
about just, I'm with you. It's kind of from here on in. It's change is the only constant. It's a cliche, but it's true. It's a cliche for a
Yes,
reason.
it is.
Um, but I think it's that flexibility and diversity of kind of working practices that I think we kind of always had, but just in a different way. And then to your point, it's now about reimagining it and just keep on reimagining it, because who knows what the
Mhm.
future is going to hold. There's going to be other things and other innovations. And I think there's a connection for me, going back to the trust and transparency that you were sharing, that you've really clearly invested a lot in, and a key part of your culture. For me, a lot of that goes with your ability to be comfortable with this diversity of working practices, because I
Mhm.
think there's a lot of news headlines around this, about that productivity paradox, where
Yeah.
a lot of us report having that flexibility to work hybrid or remote, we feel more productive, yet managers often assume that people aren't being more
Yes.
productive. But at the core of that, for me at least, in part, is if you trust that people are inherently good and hardworking, and and they're highly engaged, and they're connected, and they're working hard, and they're delivering. I don't care where you work. I
Mm.
really don't. But that's I think for some, and as we've evolved and changed, and as the world continues to change, I think there's a trust. I think going back to what you were saying earlier, I think when you have high trust, for me, it allows you to do a lot of things, but I think it allows you to also be more accepting of change and be more open to kind of new ways of working when you've got that high trust in the culture.
You're absolutely right, and I feel the same way. And I think what's interesting is there are a lot of managers out there that don't have that level of trust. And so they want to know, where their people are at all times, and they should be online between 9 and 5. And, we talk, bringing your whole self to work. That's always a statement, right? That's been out there for a while. And I think nowadays we really have trusted people to do that, because if my manager is trusting me to do the job, and it's quality over quantity, so it is less about me sitting at my desk 9 to 5. How many times, and I'll admit this, I sat at my desk from 9 to 5, and probably 2 hours, maybe more, but I will go, I won't admit fully to it, but like you're on your phone, or you're like, surfing the web, or your brain needs a break. You can't be doing work 9 to 5. And so now people get to work when their brain is turned on. They get to take a break, take a rest. And so that level of trust and that level of flexibility also, again, if we connect it back, that actually does connect back to productivity. Because people, work when they need to work, when their brain is working. There are some, there are some roles and jobs out there that don't allow for that, of course.
Of course, yeah.
But our roles, similar to the jobs that we have, I know that I am firing on all cylinders between 7 and 9, and then I need to take a break and give my brain just a little bit of a moment, and then I'm on, my other 2 high productive hours are between 2 and 4. Not to say I'm not productive in the other ones, but no. It's just that's when my brain I'm firing on all cylinders. And I think allowing people that trust and that flexibility to work when they need to work is important.
Yeah. And again, it's like, you can feel disconnected in the office. You can be unproductive in the office, yes. For sure.
Yes.
It isn't highly correlated.
Sure, we all know those people that just, walk around with their coffee cup all day, right?
Naming no names. Yeah. I think that whole agenda around connectivity, productivity, it's just a whole different frame of reference. And, we can't kind of not talk about as well with that kind of, idea of change in mind and how we're forever changed, is the role of technology in that. A lot of what we've talked about today has been about that importance of the human connection. And I'm 100% a believer that is never going to go away as being the crucial, important part of what fuels us as humans and what fuels us as organizations. But, with more tech, we're all using more tech in the workplace. We're using tech to communicate. We're using tech to listen to employees, all of those things. How do you think about, how you continue to keep connectivity very human, communication very human, as the tech quotient goes up in our organizations? How do you balance that?
I feel like you're leaning towards the two-letter word. We all have come to know as AI, which is a part of that overall tech. I think it would be naive of me to not realize and not welcome it. It's here. It's something that is really important. I'll take it back to the point of thinking of myself as a person before an employee. And as a person, I use technology all day long. My home runs on, and I can't say her name because it'll go off, but my home runs on that. And my children, we have a shared calendar, and I have messed around with Gemini and the chat bots and things in my personal life. So knowing that that's who I am personally, I'd be naive not to think about it from an employee perspective as well, and an organization perspective. And so our organization does run on technology. We are a technology company with a platform. And so the way that we keep people connected is through an intranet. It is through it's through Slack, it's through Google. And so being able to leverage that in a way that employees can respond to quickly, I think is really where we're being very intentional around. If you think about yourself and the amount of notifications that happen on your own personal device, it is hard to keep track of everything. And so you have to make it as simple as possible.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where we're really putting a lot of effort right now, is especially in the communication and engagement space, is, how do we make information easy to access when you're ready to access? And it's really about breaking it down of like, this is the must and this is the nice to know. And, the nice to know is I'll get to it when I have a couple of minutes. And the must is this is important for me right now to the success of my job or whatever that is. I think, drop my earpod.
That's okay. Take a pause.
I think what's interesting is that as AI comes in, we as a HR department have a responsibility to help the organization lean into it and not take the human element out of it. And I think that's the role that we play. And it's a really important and critical one. There are ways of using AI that are going to make us more efficient, more productive, are going to bring organizations, fast track forward. But I think the important piece is making sure that in certain areas where applicable, that we don't take that human element out of it, because when we do, that's when I think things start to get dangerous.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think, we're also, you can't open anything or click on anything without seeing AI somewhere in the headline. But we're still at the early stages, I think, of kind of, relatively so when we think about it in terms of an phase of innovation that we're in. Still a lot to learn, very early days. And I'm with you. We've got to kind of feel our way, because I think there are definitely, and we can see it ourselves, some of the productivity gains, like you said, in your running your personal life as well as at work. Yeah. We can all see those kind of early possibilities of productivity gains, of, helping, like you said, personalize things more to the individual. Like, hey, notification, this is helpful. I'm nudging you with something, and the AI is helping us be more either productive or get things done, whatever it is, or be just aware of something. I'm looking for those kind of things that will benefit the human, in the best possible way, without it, and balancing, like you say, there's an ethical, I think, and moral responsibility to just make sure that we're being responsible about whichever AI we're using or introducing into the workplace, and then also balancing that, thinking about the impact on the individual as well, and on the human, because it can be scary, various degrees of scary. Depending on where you're coming from, what your comfort level is, the risk that is genuine for some of us that it's taking aspects of our job away. There's definitely a fear factor there. So it really is a balancing act. I think like any major change, it has upsides, it has downsides. Come at it thoughtfully, for sure.
Correct. Well, yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I could keep going for hours and hours with you. I love talking with you, Keri-Lynn. But we're kind of coming to the end of our time here. As always, I feel so privileged to get to talk to wonderful people like you, and you specifically today, because I always take away, I'm secretly writing the odd little note to myself here on my pad underneath the desk. I'm thinking, oh yeah, that was a good idea. I'm going to kind of steal that. But it has been so insightful. Thank you for sharing your story. Before we depart, our listeners sometimes like to connect with our guests. So if you're open to that, where and how can kind of people best find you and maybe connect with you or connect with the company Agero if they would wish to?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would love that. LinkedIn, I am on LinkedIn, Keri-Lynn Pajer, and feel free to also check out Agero.com. You can reach me there as well. And thank you, Miriam. This has been a wonderful, wonderful experience. It has been great talking to you.
Likewise, and thanks to everybody listening out there. Really appreciate it.